Welcome to a Deep in Bear Country emergency update. Do. It's an emergency update from Deep in Bear Country, a Berenstain Bearcast. I'm your host, Phil Gonzalez, and this is an interesting update that I received from Mike Berenstain's assistant, who listened to my most recent episode about the farm. It was the Berenstain Bears Visit Farm, the Lift the Flap book. And speaking of flaps, I was in quite a flap about the presence of a certain turkey on Farmer Ben's farm. I refused to speak the name of said turkey because it was just a whole can of worms that I didn't feel like opening back up. But then, like a couple of days later, I received an email from Mike's assistant, Mads Torres. And believe me, here at Deep in Bear Country, a Berenstain Bearcast, we are mad about Mads. In a good way, like positive, like we're mad about Mads. Mads Torres is a graphic designer and illustrator themselves. They have a website you should visit, madstorres.com, MADSTORRES. This is not a promotion that they asked me to do. This is a promotion I am very enthusiastic about doing because Mads is Mads. I don't know how to pluralize the name. Mads' website is awesome. Their illustrations are amazing. Their art is incredible, and their comics are worth checking out. So check out madstorres.com. But also thank you, Mads, for updating me about the name of said turkey. You see, back in 2020, November of 2020, I covered the book, The Berenstain Bears Give Thanks? Was that what it was? Was that what it was? Yes, the Berenstain Bears Give Thanks. And I was distressed because of the plot of the book, which focused a lot on Farmer Ben's turkey that the Bear family was going to purchase, or they did a sort of a weird swap. Papa Bear was swapping his services for the turkey to eat, to devour, to consume on Thanksgiving Day, and the Cubs were upset because they liked this turkey a lot, and the plot eventually became that Papa softened to the idea of this turkey becoming their new pet and becoming a member of the family. But the big plot of the story was a retelling of the Thanksgiving story. It's a Living Lights book, so it was very much focused on like the persecution of the Pilgrims and how they fled Europe to, or they never state where they're coming from, which is also interesting. It never says England, it just says like their land, where they weren't allowed to worship God in the way they chose, which, as we know from basic historical comprehension, wasn't the actual story behind the they weren't called pilgrims. I mean, I think I cover all this in the episode. They weren't called pilgrims. That's a term that came about later. I think they referred to themselves as victims, which they most definitely weren't. Remember the historical figures we refer to today as pilgrims were actually not persecuted so much as they wanted to persecute. They wanted to. They were so extreme in their beliefs that people were just like, we can't deal with you. And so they were like, well, let's go to a land where there's no one really around who was going to put up much of a fight so that we can have our own oppressive form of worship. It's a whole thing, and I'm not going to get into it any more than I already did. So they fled to this like American land where I live now, the land that was to become America, to sort of set up shop. And they had absolutely no idea what they were doing, and they almost all died. Fortunately, there was I almost said bear. There was a person already living in the land, name of Squanto, who helped them out begrudgingly, who spoke English and could relate to them because Squanto had been held captive as a slave for a while and was forced to learn English, and took pity on these poor fools who came to his land without any proper preparation and was like, fine, I'll help these people out. That's more or less the rough idea. In any case, what ended up happening in the original version of the Berenstain Bears Give Thanks, and I'm going to pull up, if you don't want to deal with this, if you don't want to hear about it, if you don't want to put up with this story again, feel free to just skip this. But in the original version of the Berenstain Bears Give Thanks, they find that Farmer Ben's like, look, I have a turkey that I've been raising for you to slaughter and eat, and I've called it Squanto. And I was in the original version of the story, I was appropriately confused and befuddled and a little bit disgusted at the fact that this bird that they were fattening up to eat was called Squanto. And he's like, yeah, it's the name of the native bear who helped the Pilgrims plant their corn when they settled in their new home. So I thought that's a good name for a turkey that you're going to murder. And I was upset about this. And then, of course, later on, Sister gets all excited about putting on a pageant for her relatives about the first Thanksgiving, and she collects the tail feathers of this bird named Squanto to create native bear headdresses. And then they put on the pageant, which involves Honey Bear dressing up in native bear costume and creepily creeping up on the Pilgrims. And the Pilgrims are like, I hope this is a friendly bar. And then, it's a friendly bear who speaks in broken English, me Squanto. And Squanto is like, here's some corn, here's how you do it. And then they all settle down and give thanks to God for somehow figuring out how to not die. And that's the story of the first bear, I guess, Thanksgiving. And I was appalled at the sort of regressive concepts on display in this book that came out in 2009. Well, so Mads sends me a message that says, you might be interested in learning that we actually updated this book. In 2001, it was republished under the same title, same basic plot, but with some adjustments to language that at least address the flaws in the first book. I don't think it goes so far as to actually repair the flaws of the first book, because, again, this is a book that I don't know if it really needed rewriting. I don't know if it really needed republishing, but also I know that Mike's under contract to, publishers, and they're going to reprint it. They have the rights to reprint it. So I can imagine him stepping in and being like, this is a flawed book, and if you're going to put it out, I don't have the time, or, and you're probably not going to pay me to re-illustrate the whole thing, but here's some corrections you can do to it that'll at least soften the blow if you're going to insist on putting this book out. Now, again, I don't know the whole story behind this, but that's what it seems like they did, because the first major change is that the turkey is no longer called Squanto. The turkey is now called Plymouth, and we get a rewrite of the scene where the turkey is introduced to the bears. No longer is it the name of the native bear who helped the Pilgrims plant their corn when they settled in their new home. Now, history says that Plymouth is the place where the Pilgrim Bears first set foot in this great land, and the first Thanksgiving feast was eaten right there in Plymouth. So I couldn't think of a better name for a turkey, which is a nice way of course correcting. So the turkey is now named Plymouth. Also, and here's something that I find fascinating, and that Mike corrects or changes throughout the rest of the book, is that the Pilgrims are no longer called Pilgrims. The Pilgrims are called Pilgrim Bears. I don't know why, but I can only assume that it's because the native bears are called native bears. And so it makes sense to call the Pilgrim Bears Pilgrim Bears, so that we are setting up that this is not a case of the natives and the pilgrims. It's a case of native bears and pilgrim bears. It's a case of these are not their identifiers, these are their qualifiers. They're all bears living on this land, and we are just simply saying this is how we are identifying them. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but it's sort of putting their identifiers on equal footing. So then our next correction is that very thing. So Mama Bear doesn't look up pilgrims in the encyclopedia. She looks up Pilgrim Bears in the encyclopedia. Now, it still says pilgrims in the illustration because Mike's not going to re-illustrate this whole book. Again, it seems like he's doing this just to correct some of the more awkward moments. Now, we are still getting Sister Bear collecting turkey feathers in order to make her own native headdresses, which is problematic in its own right. But again, this book is probably being published in one form or another. You may as well soften the blow. This is about softening the blow to me more than just full on correcting what we've put up. So again, we had the pageant, which involved a creepy Honey Bear sneaking out, and again, we don't know that this is Honey Bear originally. The shadow of Honey Bear creeping up, the cub saying, look, who is that coming into the village? It is a native bear. I hope he is friendly. Now we, again, softening the blow, we get a rewrite of Sister's dialogue, which says, look, who is that coming into the village? It's a native bear coming to help. And instead of it just being a creepy shadow crawling into their village, it says, in crawl little Honey Bear. So that we sort of understand why this native bear is crawling in the first place. We don't get a illustration of Sister and Cousin Fred's face, so they are still shocked and terrified and pointing. But again, we don't have this sort of assumption that this is going to be a hostile bear. It just says it's a native bear. Oh, a native bear coming to visit. Sorry, I had there was something obscuring the image. It's a native bear coming to visit instead of a native bear. I hope he is friendly. So softening the blow. Softening the blow. Softening the blow. They called where they landed Plymouth. Now here's one of the more egregious moments in the book. Honey Bear originally greeted them with "Me Squanto," which thanks a lot for the 1950s representation of Native Americans. That has been course corrected to "Greetings, my name is Squanto," because again, Squanto spoke English. Fluent English, was completely capable of conversing not as a cartoon Native American. Originally, Cousin Fred responded with, "He speaks English! What a miracle!" Now it just says, he says, "Welcome, Squanto. We're very glad to meet you." I don't know why, again, they would be welcoming Squanto to his own land, but I mean, the Pilgrims probably reacted that way anyway. The narration originally said, Squanto was friendly. He helped the Pilgrims grow more food. He showed them how to plant corn. Without Squanto, they would have starved. Now it says, Squanto was friendly and helpful. So what we're getting is, it seems like in the original narration, Brother Bear was saying, don't worry, this was friendly. This was a friendly bear. Now we're getting Brother Bear saying, not only was Squanto friendly, as we could assume, I guess, Squanto was friendly and helpful. And also, we're getting rid of the whole Squanto could speak English by some miracle of God. Now it's just like it's acknowledged. So again, not fixing the problems, but we are softening the blow. And my final thing I wanted to talk about was at the Thanksgiving feast, which is represented by a football with a turkey leg strapped to it. They decided to have a Thanksgiving feast. Squanto came to the feast too. They all bowed their heads and gave thanks to God for leading them to their new home where they could live in peace and freedom. And then they ate and ate and ate. In the new version, they give thanks to God for leading them to this new home and also give thanks to their new friends, the native bears, and the help they were given. We cut out all references to living in peace and freedom, which, as we know, was not the case. Which, as we know, isn't what followed at all. Which, as we know, only applied to the native bears. So that's the new version of the Berenstain Bears Give Thanks. Still a lot of problems, but if the book has to exist, I'm glad that Mike saw fit to correct the more problematic aspects of the book. Now, when I work at a bookstore, I work at a used bookstore, and the other day a customer came in and they were purchasing a handful of just sort of clearance children's paperbacks that had been tossed onto the clearance cart. These were books that we were like, we don't need these, or these aren't going to sell. So, you want to toss 50 cents our way. Here's a bunch of children's clearance. And the books she brought up, or the books they brought up, I don't know her gender identifier. The books they brought up were not a bunch, like three. In addition to the other books they were buying, was a stack of just sort of cheap children's Thanksgiving books that I guess had been dredged up out of the bowels of our basement and tossed onto the children's cart along with a bunch of other children's books. Books that we wouldn't have put out in the first place. I'm going to assume that they were just tossed up there, just here. And the customer said that they wanted to purchase these books because they were going to destroy them. And they said, I'm an indigenous citizen of this city, and I object to these books even existing. They're terrible. I'm going to purchase them simply to, I don't know, toss them into the river. And I said, if you're going to do that, just take the books. Like, we don't care. Like, these aren't making us a profit. They are just books that we tossed onto the cart. Just have them. If we don't care about these books anyway. These are terrible books. And they were books, children's Thanksgiving books that basically told this story, which, reinforced the concept in the idea that this isn't a story that even needs to be out there anymore. It's flawed. It's a flawed retelling of history. It's a very biased retelling of history. And again, I understand that Mike is contractually obligated to share this story under the aegis of the Berenstain Bears' Living Lights. But it's problematic. But so I told Mads when they sent me this updated version that I would do an update acknowledging the changes that had been made. I thought it was great that, the problems were addressed and taken to heart, and that Mike did what he could to address this deeply flawed book. That the turkey is now named Plymouth and exists, there's I guess branching continuities now. The old continuity exists in its own pocket universe. The new continuity is the mainline continuity with a turkey named Plymouth. So I hope that clarifies stuff. I hope that brings things. I hope that makes people at least a little less uncomfortable with the book as it stands. Again, lots of other things wrong with the book that I could spend a lot of time pointing out, but it exists. It exists in a less problematic format. So thank you, Mads, once again, for bringing this to my attention. There are a couple of more books that I will be talking about that Mads has pointed out have been updated since then. Again, I covered this book in 2020. The book was updated in 2021. So I don't know. Did I have anything to do with that? Probably not. But I like to believe it because I have so little influence on this world that it's nice to believe that I've had some kind of, I don't know, positive effect on the way thing. In any case, thank you so much for joining me. This is not actually the actual episode for this week. This is just an emergency update. So there is an episode coming out. I'm setting this out now just because I wanted to cover it before I covered my actual book. So thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for listening. And I'll see you in the actual episode of Deep in Bear Country. Yes.